Estamos live.
Good evening, everyone. We are here at the Inner Enlightenment Spiritist Society tonight, and we're going to be with our dear brother Julio Carvalho, who is going to introduce us what's happening this week in New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. Go ahead, Julio.
Good evening, everyone. We are glad to participate in the 23rd Spiritist Week of the Tri-State. This event began, as the number stated, 23 years ago with our dearest friend Norma. She has done so much for the Spiritist movement in keeping up this tradition. And today, the entire Federation take all the collaborators to continue what one day Norma started. The Spiritist Week, once of New York, now is of the Tri-State. So thank you for the participants, and thank you, Norma, for beginning your hard work to keep this tradition alive.
Thank you, Julio, and thank you too to be here with us tonight. We wish you were in person, but it's good to have you online. And thank you for everyone who came in person as well. So, Abilio, can you open a page from the Way, the Truth, and the Life for us?
Sure. The Way, the Truth, and Life, Lesson 40, A Time for Trust. And he asked them, "Where is your faith?" Luke 8:25.
Yes, we can't hear if you're reading.
Sorry, TJ.
Are you reading out loud?
Yes.
We can't hear you.
Maybe get closer to the microphone.
Okay, I don't know what to do, TJ. I'm going to check. No, it's not the problem. Go ahead.
The storm had troubled the souls of even the strongest disciples, disoriented before the fury of the elements. They cry out for Jesus' help. The Master does help them, but then asks, "Where is your faith?" The scene suggests some heavy pondering. Jesus' question clearly points out the need for trust when everything seems dark and lost. In such circumstances, faith will rise to the occasion in its own time. If there is a time for working and resting, for sowing and reaping, trust will also show itself at the appropriate hour. Nobody needs to be optimistic when everything is going well. It is difficult to prove one's friendship in moments of happiness. Of course, disciples should expect opportunities for more struggles, times when they can apply the teachings of the Lord more extensively and intensely. Otherwise, it would be impossible to tell just how much they have grown spiritually. During these dolorous times, many invoke direct help from Christ. And help always comes because the heavenly mercy is infinite. But once the difficulty is overcome, there will always be the question, where is your faith? More obstacles will appear until the disciple learns how to serenely control, educate, and overcome him or herself based on the lessons received.
Thank you, Abilio. We invite all of us in this moment for opening prayer. There's so much gratitude for the Tri-State Spiritist Federation, the U.S. Spiritist Federation, and for all the ones who are responsible for the Spiritist Week. We send this gratitude to all the Spiritist centers from all these 3 states. Thank you, God, our brother Jesus, to be here tonight. in your presence. We invite all of us to embrace our brother Julio, so much love and gratitude. And we pray, Father, for inspiration and guidance to his heart and mind, in order for him to transmit to all of us words that will console our hearts. So in your name we ask permission to start this lecture. So be it. So tonight, with so much gratitude, we have our brother Julio Carvalho from the Divine Line Spiritist Center in Newark, New Jersey, and may we embrace him and send good vibrations throughout this talk. Thank you, Julio.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the introduction. And once again, we are very thankful for Norma starting this tradition back 23 years ago, the Tri-State Spiritist Week that was once the Spiritist Week of New York, but fortunately has grown to the local states, Connecticut and New Jersey. So the theme for tonight is the impact of fear in our mental health that was brought by the pandemic. What people don't realize is that what you perceive will actually establish your emotions. Your perception dictates how you see things and how you feel about these things. I'll give you an example. Let's say you live in a neighborhood and there are three neighbors. Let's name these neighbors neighbor A, neighbor B, and neighbor C. It's the beginning of the week, and on Monday, neighbor A knocks on your door and says to you, I have some news for you. Neighbor B has been saying awful things about you. So you look at neighbor A and you ask yourself, what in the world can this neighbor be talking about me? He doesn't know me. And neighbor A goes on to say that neighbor B has spread around the neighborhood that you are untrustworthy, that no one should invite you to their homes because you might steal something. So now you experience this emotion of animosity towards neighbor B. How in the world he can say these things about you? You never met the guy, you never spoke with the guy, let alone you've been to his house. How dare he say these things about you? So you spend, most of the time thinking about this man, and the emotions that you experience are of animosity. A whole week goes by, and then on the following Monday, neighbor A knocks on your door again, and he says, can I talk to you? Remember what I said last week about neighbor B? Well, I made a mistake. Neighbor B did not say anything about you. It was actually neighbor C. So now you shift your animosity from neighbor B to neighbor C. And I ask all of you who are listening to this talk, throughout those 7 days, the information you had was false or true? Well, the information that you had was false because neighbor B never said anything about you. It was actually neighbor C. So the information was false. Yet, in the middle of the week, if I had walked up to you and asked you, how do you feel about neighbor B? And you would say, well, I don't understand the guy. I really don't like him. I have animosity towards this man, to say the least, because he's saying these awful things about me. So the emotions that you were experiencing about neighbor B, was it true emotions or false emotions? Well, the emotions were true, even though you had false information. So let me repeat that. You have created true emotions based on false information. And unfortunately, there are many people who live their lives making assumptions all the time about relationships, about occurrences, and even about the future. And these are assumptions because either they have the wrong information or they are creating a theory in the mind of what might happen. And what they don't realize is that what they think might happen might never happen. Yet the emotions that are created are very real. And during the pandemic, there were many emotions experienced by all of us. And one of the emotions that were created, especially in the beginning, was fear. Fear is a primordial emotion. It's primordial because in order for us to continue with our existence, we need to defend ourselves. So we have an instinct to live. No animals seek to commit suicide. All living creatures want to continue its existence, wants to perpetuate its species. So therefore, we have an instinct to live. So at the same time, we have an instinct to protect ourselves. And in order to protect ourselves, we must experience fear. So during the process of our evolution, fear is an emotion that was developed on the need to protect ourselves from predators. So it's a very strong emotion, and your body reacts in very peculiar way to prepare you either for you to fight your predator or for you to run away from your predator. It's called the fight or flight response, which is mostly driven by a part of your brain called the amygdala. So when you experience fear, there are so many changes in your body. For example, blood runs away from your prefrontal cortex. This is the part of your brain that deals with logic and reasoning. So, this first reaction of our body prepares us either to fight or flight. And we are acting more based on instinct, based on our animalistic ways than our rational ways, because blood flows away from the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for reasoning and logic. Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases because it's preparing your body, once again, either to fight or flight. Then your pupils dilate, your eyes allow more light to come in order for you to see better. There is more blood flow to your muscles, either for you to fight or flight. So imagine experiencing this emotion on a constantly basis. Imagine experience fear all the time. It's take its toll on the body, and especially in our mental health. And when it comes to the pandemic, in the beginning, we could say that we did not know what we were about to face because it was something new. But then we have more than 18 months of experiencing the pandemic. And most people are still living in fear as if they did not know what the pandemic is all about. And what is even more worrisome is the fact that most people gather their information and construct their worldview with this information that they absorb from TV. And people probably don't know what TV is all about. The news is not necessarily concerned with informing people, but rather to sell. I'm not saying that I am against this, I'm just explaining the rules of the game. The purpose of a TV channel, it's not to necessarily inform individuals, but to make people glued to the screen in order for them to sell products. They have many sponsors, and these sponsors depend on a high view of individuals in order to make sure that their products will be watched and most likely bought. And so the TV has a purpose to keep a high rate of audience. And how do you keep a high rate of audience? Well, there are many techniques that you can do this. You all have heard the saying that sex sells. It definitely does. When there is sex on TV, people are glued to the screen. But also conflict. That's another aspect of the TV business that keeps people glued to the TV. No one wants to give a established, firm opinion and clear without any controversy. The purpose of these TV shows is always to bring controversial information because controversy also sells. And then fear. Fear is another technique in order to keep people glued to the TV. Because if they create an atmosphere of fear, they're also providing you supposedly with the information to solve the problem that it's being created. As a result, the information that you might receive, I'm not saying all the TV channels, but you really have to search for good information. Most likely the information you're going to get, it's not the truth, but the partial truth. And if you get this partial truth of what's going on, you will develop your worldview. And that, my friends, will shape how you feel about the world, how you feel about what is presently going on. So when it came to the pandemic, most people were getting their news from mainstream media. And what is the purpose of mainstream media? Is it necessarily to keep people informed, or is it to keep people glued on the TV screen? It's amazing that we have all the numbers about the pandemic readily available to us on the government's website, and most people are not even aware of the existence of these websites. You can check live data of what's going on with the pandemic in order for you to inform yourself of what is the true threat of the pandemic, but most people are not aware. If you go out on the street and you ask your average individual what they think about the pandemic and how many people have died and how many people go to the hospital and what are the chances of them getting the COVID-19, the answers that they give are so much higher than the information, the data that we have. This is hard data. This is not my personal opinion. This is data that's readily available for all of us to see. And this data is given by the CDC. And what does CDC stands for? It's Center for Disease Control. This is a government agency that provides us with these numbers about all different kinds of diseases in the United States, but also COVID-19. But you also have websites such as World Meter. And World Meter is a website run by the United Nations. It gives all sorts of information about our health, about economy, about natural resources, and there's also a special section on World Meter that talks about the COVID-19. So you get a picture of the world in relationship to COVID-19 spread. Now, most people, they're not even aware that these websites exist. And where do they get their information from? They get their information from the TV, from mainstream media. And most likely, that has resulted in people living in a constant state of panic, a constant state of anxiety, in a constant state of fear. And when you look around, you begin to notice that the impact of the perception of the threat has been more detrimental than the COVID-19 itself. When you look around and you see how people have lived their lives and the choices they have made and how they still live their lives, the perceived threat has become way more detrimental to them than the actual COVID-19 pandemic. So one has to inform ourselves wisely in order not to make any assumptions, but rather analyze the hardcore data in order for us not to be fooled by mainstream media or newscasts that has the objective to sell and not necessarily to inform. Otherwise, we are constantly controlled as puppets by these individuals. There's probably a chance that most of you are not aware that some newscasters have left their career because they were so fed up of how the information was being manipulated to scare people. People who had been TV anchors for years. And they did not simply give up that particular job. They gave up their career as a TV anchor because they openly spoke against what the media industry was doing to make sure that people were living in fear. Because during the pandemic, there were many positive aspects of the pandemic. People who were sick, they were old, they had comorbidities, and they contracted COVID-19, and yet they were able to survive. Most of you probably never heard these stories on TV. I personally work for a hospice. And if you don't know what a hospice is, it's a palliative intervention that is provided when someone is dying. So let's say someone is at the hospital, the doctor has given them a terminal diagnosis, the patient knows he's going to die, the family knows he's going to die, the doctor knows he's going to die. And until the 1960s, if that was the case, what was the course of action back then? Well, they kept poking the patient with needles, making the patient so uncomfortable, forcing the family to obey visiting hours. And someone one day asked a bright question, why are we doing this? Let's ask the patient what the patient wants. And what would you like us to do, sir? Well, I want to go home. The last place I want to be on my last days on earth is at a hospital. I want to be home. So an individual is taken home in order for them to die where they want to be, home with their dogs, cats, and relatives surrounding them. So I personally saw people who had stage 3 terminal cancer, all sorts of diseases, and these people contracted COVID-19, and yet they were able to survive. Yes, they were sick for a little while, but then they were able to go on. Because for the simple fact that for some of these patients, when they go home and they are in their natural ambience, and they are surrounded by their relatives, they prolong their dying process. They're expected to die within 6 months, and they ended up dying a year later. So some of these patients, they were able to overcome COVID-19 and continue with their existence, and even continue with their terminal disease and die later from something else and not from COVID-19. Now, I'm sure you probably never heard these stories. And if you did, they're very few in comparison to the ongoing stories that you hear that this can kill everybody. And the result of us absorbing this partial truth from the media is a constant state of fear. So your body is constantly prepared either to fight or flight. So that results also in a constant state of anxiety, of uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen. And that has resulted in so many other problems for our planet that the consequences will be dealt for months, if not years to come. All of you guys are aware about the supply, demand, disruption that have caused from people being locked down for the COVID-19. The lockdown, it's really controversial. Its efficacy in order to curb the effects of COVID-19. In New York City, for example, the statistics show that most people that went to the hospital, they were in lockdown in greater quantities than people that were actually forced to go out and work because they had no choice. So what the lockdown has caused is a disruption in the supply-demand process. And as a result, what that brings to us, for each one of us, it's inflation. And what is inflation? Inflation, it's a very complex term to describe in a lecture of 55 minutes. But in simple terms, it's when an item keeps getting more expensive over time. So if there is the same quantity of items and more people looking for that item, the price will increase. If there is an abundance of an item and not many people are looking for that item, so the price will decrease. So the disruption in supply demand caused by the lockdowns has caused lots of inflation around the world. In England, for example, the price of gas has gone up 300%, the price of fuel. And if you have been to the meat market lately, you have noticed how expensive meat is right now. So you have all these other problems that were created due to this situation. Not to mention that everywhere you look now, they need someone to work. You could see that everybody is hiring. And the question is, how in the world people are not going back to work? What's going on here? What one has to realize is that when we are accustomed to a routine, it's much easier for us to maintain that routine in comparison to stop with the routine and then to start again. Have you been in an exercise regimen before that you were following in a very disciplined way, and then you stopped exercising for a while? Do you remember how hard it was for you to start exercising again? It was very hard because to move you from a stationary moment to get you moving again, it is very hard. So many people have not gone back to work. And what about the religious field? Look what churches are facing right now. Many people have stopped going to church. And if we try to analyze our own realm of activity, the Spiritist Center, the Spiritist centers still have not been able to recoup their original numbers. And then you might ask yourself, how in the world that has not happened yet? It's been so long and people have not gone back. Well, by closing our Spiritist centers, we have broken the habit of going to the Spiritist Center on a weekly basis. And for many people to get back on that habit, it's very difficult. And some of them, they're saying that it's due to COVID-19. Well, maybe the initial reason was COVID-19, but these same people, you might see them enjoying in their lives. Maybe they're going to watch games, they're going to the movies, or they're going on vacation. And I'm not saying that we're not supposed to go to the movies, vacations, or the games. Go ahead, let's continue doing all that. But the same principle that you apply to make a choice if you should go to a game or a movie or not, that should be also applied to go to the Spiritist Center. It's very important that we receive this body of knowledge on a regular weekly basis. And although I'm here speaking to all of you virtually, nothing compares than actually being in front of you. I heard a very wise man saying that listening to a lecture from a computer screen is like standing before a screen while watching a fire, which is very different than you standing in front of the fire. You can feel the heat, you can hear the noise. It's very different than watching a fire from the screen. And the same applies to our lectures. So, what really saddens me is the fact that this moment could have been a very moment for us for the Spiritist movement, in which we could have shown our courage, our faith, our certainty in the principles we speak so much. And yet, we went with the flow. We went with the flow of fear. We went with the flow of anxiety. We went with the flow of discouragement and disillusionment, when this could have been a moment for us to shine, because you can only shine as stars when there is darkness. There is light everywhere, you don't shine. Take, for example, the early Christians, and all the hardships they went through in order to proclaim their faith, in order for them to live up to what they believed in. Now, these people were not confronting a virus that only kills 1.70% of those who are contaminated. These people were facing lions. They were facing fires. They were facing hot oils that they were dumped into. And they faced this with courage and determination because they firmly believed in the principles lived by Christ, which gave them all that courage. And it begs the question how we have lived the opportunity of demonstrating our faith through this pandemic. Have we shown fear, anxiety, discouragement, disillusioned? Or have we shown courage? Have we given people a demonstration how certainty we are about our convictions? I'm not saying at all that to show our conviction in the Spiritist philosophy, we should not pay attention to our biological needs in regards to protecting ourselves. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that in any circumstance that we go through, this is what we learn through the Spiritist literature. It's an opportunity for us to show our courage, our determination. It's an opportunity for us to exercise our spiritual muscles and become stronger. So, the COVID-19 did not bother me personally at all, but it does bother me very much of what I see with the Spiritist centers and what people are still struggling to go back to the Spiritist center. On a personal note, last year, while everyone was going crazy about the COVID-19, my son's cancer came back. My son was born with cancer in his kidney. We had to remove the kidney with the cancer, with the tumor. And that tumor came back last year in the hype of the pandemic. So I and my wife were facing something so much more intense that we pay little attention to COVID-19. But what really kept our eyes in a very different direction was the fact that because we go to hospitals and nursing homes on a regular basis, we saw truly what was going on instead of absorbing information from the TV. And as a result, we had a completely different perception, and we were able to keep ourselves calm in order to deal with my son's health. And we overcame. We are very thankful to science. We are very thankful to the scientists who developed the chemo drugs. We are very thankful to Madame Curie, responsible for developing which it's parts of radiotherapy, and because he also received the radiation. We are thankful for all the nurses who were involved in his case, and we are thankful for our guardian angels, our friends who prayed so much, and definitely we're thankful to God. But it was an opportunity to gain our strength. It was an opportunity for us to move forward, to build up our conviction in what we believe in. And what we believe in is only what happens to you, whatever is best for you. Life is not about destroying you and making you miserable. Life is about giving you the opportunities that you need, the conditions that you must have in order to develop yourself intellectually and morally, which is the mission that you're born with. You're born with the mission to develop your intellect and to develop your morality, to become extremely smart, to become extremely good. So this past year was an opportunity for most of us who knows this information to live up to our conviction. But is that what we have seen in our personal circles? Is that the kind of testimony we have lived? You know, unfortunately, I did not see much of that. And we are constantly taught that when we make our decisions based on fear and we show fear to others, we just make ourselves weak and useless, to tell you the truth. Christ himself taught us this concept in the parable of talents. In the parable of talents, we are told that the kingdom of God resembles as a master who gives different talents to 3 different servants. He gives 10 talents to one, 5 talents to another, and just 1 talent to the third servant. So he goes out on a trip, and then after a while he comes back, and the person that he gave 10 talents to, he asked, what did you do with my talents? And he said, well, I used it, I multiplied it, I invested, and here it is. I have 20 talents. And then the master says, well, they are yours. Come and join me in happiness, in joy. Then he does the same thing for the second guy. You gave me 5, I multiplied, I worked, I invested. Now here's 10. Well, they're yours. And then the guy who received just 1 talent, he said, I knew of your severity, master, and then I decided to hide your talent. Out of fear, I did this. And then for this guy, the master says that only pain, suffering, gnashing of teeth is reserved for this individual. So what made this individual make such a poor choice? Fear. Fear is never a wise counsel. Ask yourself, my friends, with your behavior, what have you shown around? What have you taught to your friends with your own example? Is it fear or is it courage? Have you provided hope or disillusionment? But then you might say, well, but people die. There's so much chaos going on. Well, it's true. People die. And it's very sad from anyone who dies of anything for those who are around that person. So from an emotional point of view, I sympathize with anyone that is experiencing the death of someone that they care very much. I truly do. However, if we only stick to numbers, if we analyze this rationally and coldly, what are the chances that you will get COVID-19 and you're going to die from COVID-19? What are the chances? Well, I want you guys to analyze with me, and then I'm going to project on your screen the websites I was talking to you about. And this website is the website from the World Health Organization, who I think someone has to give me the ability to share my screen, which I don't have it. I cannot share my screen, so if anyone can actually empower me to share my screen. If the website is called World Health Organization, World Meter, and World Meter, we have here statistics. So let me see if I could show it to you through my phone. So right now, we have 45.5 million individuals in the United States that have been contaminated with COVID-19. And out of the 45.5 million individuals in the US that have been contaminated with COVID-19, 738,000 have died from COVID-19. How many people are in the US? We have approximately 330 million people in the US. So the question is, how many people will die from COVID-19 if they contract COVID-19? So if you have COVID-19, what are the chances that you're going to die? That is the question. So it's a simple math problem. What you do, you put the number of people that have already died, which is 738,000, at the top. So here's the number right there, 73,800, divided by the amount of people that have been contaminated, which is 45.5 million. So here I have 45.5 million. Oh, thank you so much for someone who showed the website. Okay, so you can see on my phone there, 738,000 divided by 45.5 million. Okay, so that equals, and then times 100. So you get the 100%. And at this time, the percentage that we get is 1.6%. 1.6%. So let me repeat that. If you get COVID-19, what are the chances that you're going to die from COVID-19? 1.6%. Do you understand this? Which means if you get COVID-19, your chances of survival from COVID-19 is 98.4%. So this is not your perceived threat. This is now your real threat based on numbers, based on hardcore data. It's not an assumption. These are the numbers. How likely you are to die from COVID-19? Well, 1.6%. And when we analyze these 1.6% individuals, who are these individuals who have died from COVID-19? Well, that's where you go to the Center of Disease Control. Because from the beginning, they have told us that the people who are most vulnerable from COVID-19 are individuals who have comorbidities. What does comorbidity mean? It means that you have an underlying condition that makes your body already very weak, which might include diabetes, high blood pressure, problems related with your heart. And not only comorbidity might contribute for you to die from COVID-19, but they must also be not in control. Because if you have diabetes or if you have high blood pressure, but they are under control, then your chances of survival is higher compared to someone who doesn't have these conditions under control. But for you to be perfectly healthy under the age of 65 and die from COVID-19, the percentage is very, very low, definitely less than 1.6%. And I'm not going to calculate all these numbers for you, but it's minuscule. And if we go on to talk about children, then the numbers are almost insignificant. And I'm talking about numbers. Let me repeat myself. One person that dies of any disease, it's very hard to deal with. It's one of the greatest pain that one can experience. I'm talking about the mathematics of this in order for most of us to really have a hardcore information to construct our worldview about COVID-19. So how likely you are from dying of COVID-19? Well, if you're above age of 65 years old, and if you have comorbidities, your chances of dying is 1.6%. 1.6%. And this number, once again, the 738,000 individuals, it's not the number in comparison to the entire population. It's only in comparison to those who have been contaminated, which is 45.5 million people. And then you might say, well, but around the world is very different. People can die in different ways. COVID-19, it's a threat everywhere, and people are dying. Well, let's do the math for the whole world. And right now, in the whole world, we have the following numbers. We have that around the world, 4,977,000 have died from COVID-19. So this is the number of people who have died around the world from COVID-19. 4,977,735 around the world. How many people have been contaminated of COVID-19 around the world? So far, the number is 245,230,028. So we have here that around the world, 245,230,028 people have been contaminated with COVID-19. So now equals time 100 to get percentage. And the result is, around the world, what are the chances of you dying from COVID-19? If you get it, 2.02%. 2.02% around the world. Now, you can go on the website. Thank you, Gustavo, for showing the website. I appreciate you. You can calculate these numbers by each country. And even countries that have been not vaccinated, they took different measures, and you can compare all these numbers to inform yourself instead of you allowing yourself to be informed by other people who might not have your best interest in trying to inform you, but rather trying to scare you. Because if you live in fear all the time, you'll be very miserable. Someone might say, 245 million, it's a lot of people. Well, It's less than the population of the US. Do you know how many people we have on Earth? Approximately 8 billion people. 8 billion people. So if you try to put the number of people who have been contaminated in 8 billion people, once again, it's a very small percentage. But I'm sure you're not going to hear this on mainstream media. What you're going to hear is constantly the same information that those who have died from this and what's going on, and you get partial truth. You don't get the entire picture. And if you don't get the entire picture, you will produce emotions that are very detrimental to your health. Now, I have personal friends of mine that throughout this pandemic, I play with them. I tell them, what you have, it's not COVID-19. What you have is COVID-30. And they say, what do you mean by this? Sitting around the house and on lockdown and eating so much junk food, you have gained 30 pounds, and some people have gained 40 pounds, 50 pounds. And this is so backwards in regards to seeking health, seeking things to do in order to make your body strong. Because in order for your immune system to be strong to fight diseases, you need to be worry-free. You need to be stress-free. You need to be anxiety-free. You need to be fear-free. You need to exercise. You need to be out there bathing yourself under lots of sunlight, because vitamin D is so important for so many physiological functions. Most importantly, you have to eat healthy in order to make sure that your immune system is very strong. It still daunts me, the fact that remember those first 2 weeks back in March of 2020 when we were told, go to the supermarkets and prepare yourself to stay 2 weeks at home because we're going to go on lockdown. So like everyone else, I did not know what was going on. We did not have much information back then. I went to the supermarket. And when I went to my local supermarket, it surprised me that all the junk food was gone. Everything that comes in a can, anything that comes in a box, all the products, they are processed, they were gone. But then I went to the vegetable sections, the produce. Everything was there, like nothing happened. I had all the choices I can make because everything was there. So to me, that was strong indication of how most of us feed ourselves, nourish each cell of this living machine, living organism that is our body. So, poor nourishment, a lack of exercise, complete worrisome, those are great contributors for the decline of our health and definitely a decline in our mental health. Paradoxically, the U.S. is the country that spends most money on health, and out of the developing country is the country with the least amount of health. This is hard data. So it's a very sad situation. But for us who knows the Spiritist knowledge, we should face this in a completely different light. We should give testimony of our knowledge, of our belief, of our conviction. We should not fear. What we learned in the Spiritist philosophy is that if there is something that we have to fear, it's fear of our own imperfections, a fear that we're going to make the same mistakes again, a fear that what we were in the past year, it's exactly the person that we are today. We have made no progress of any kind. That all this information, all this literature has still yet served us no good because we are exactly the same individuals. But I am an optimistic individual. I believe in the power of human change, and I believe that we can still show our testimony, we can still show around our conviction to give proof of our courage, of our determination. Because with our behavior, we can show others that they should not live in fear, but hope. And we do this not because we only know the Spiritist knowledge, because we are sticking to science, not a particular set of numbers chosen to produce fear, but by the wholesome science that tells us right there, these are hard numbers that I gave you from these trustworthy websites that tells us that the real threat, it's nothing compared to the perceived threat that we have been absorbed by mainstream media, who once again has an agenda. And I'm not saying that they're wrong. All I'm saying is the rule of the game. The goal is to make money, but it goes against the well-being of most of us. So that tells us that it's our job to inform ourselves. We should not allow others to control our thoughts, because our thoughts shape our emotions will shape our actions will create our habits will develop our character, and our character will definitely shape our destiny. So if I have negative, disturbing, fearful, anxious thoughts, what kind of emotions am I going to have? Well, emotions that represent all those disturbed thoughts, and that will create paranoid actions. These actions would develop very ill habits, and my ill habit would definitely give me a sick character, and my sick character will create a miserable destiny. So I must change my thoughts in order to have a different destiny. And I hope to God, and I ask our beloved Christ, this human being of uncomparable love and wisdom that have stepped foot on planet, to give us all the strength that we need, the courage that we must have to overcome our weakness. Let us show, my friends, through our example, our conviction in the Spiritist philosophy. Because even if this COVID-19 was a true threat, even if most of us would have died from this, us Spiritists should not fear death whatsoever, because we know that this is nothing but a machine. We are not this machine. We are a spirit temporarily having a physical experience, and that to die, it's nothing but a transitional state, one that we simply change our form of expression, but we don't change who we are. So we should ever, never fear death. What we should be concerned, however, is that if we die without changing ourselves, without improving ourselves, it's like finishing school at the end of the year, knowing that we have not learned anything and we have to repeat the grade. So we're going to be very troubled by the fact that we have wasted our time. And I hope none of you do that. So let's pray in closing. Master Jesus, our unconditional friend, thank you so much for your kindness, for your love. Thank you, guardian angel, for all of your protection. Spiritual guides, please inspire each one of us in order for us to reach for our potential. Help us not to settle for less, but rather work really hard to fulfill our small role in making this a better world for all of us. Help us to change ourselves on a daily basis in such a way that at the end of the week, at the end of the year, at the end of this current physical existence, we can truly say to ourselves that we are a better version of ourselves. Please help those who are in power right now, all presidents, all governors, all mayors, anyone who temporarily holds power. Help them to truly choose what is best for its people, to avoid corruption of all sorts, for the sake of power. Help them and help us to do our part in our own little section of this planet. So be it.
Julio, thank you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, our gratitude, Julio. Thank you so much. Now we're going to spend some time with you on Swahili in person and also on Zoom, but really hug and hope the best for you. Yeah, and see you soon in person. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Julia.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.